Not gonna lie, this thing sounds amazing. Exhaust note on this is absolutely beautiful. Just sounds great. And as throaty as it is when you start it, it really doesn't transfer much of that noise into the interior of the vehicle. It just sounds absolutely great. Looking under the hood at this 6.4 liter V8. This thing is an absolute monster. And I'm going to show you a feature that I think is so cool. When you unlock the vehicle, the step sides come down. That is very, very cool. You don't even have to open the door or do anything to initiate them, just simply unlock the vehicle. Makes getting in and out of it without having to wait for this thing to come down that much easier. And if you have the power deploying steps like we have on my wife's vehicle and on my truck, you realize that sometimes they don't drop down quick enough and you're kind of waiting for them. This just speeds up the process and makes it more convenient. Plus, look how deep that step is. Significantly deeper than what you typically see. Very cool. Okay, so now we're on the road in this 2022 Jeep Grand Wagoneer. This is an absolutely amazing driving vehicle. This vehicle also has air ride suspension on it, so you can adjust the height of the vehicle, similar to the Ram Limited that I reviewed a few weeks back, where you can either raise or lower the vehicle. But that air ride suspension also gives the vehicle a very, very unique capability of kind of dynamically changing the ride depending on the mode that you're in. And right now we're in the automatic mode, but we can toggle through several different types of terrain modes, from snow to sand and mud to even a performance mode, or what they call sport mode. Both your front gauge cluster as well as your center stack are LCD screens, and there's a lot of information that you can put on the screen. I haven't figured out how to switch to just a general gauge mode. All the gauges seem to be digital gauges and not necessarily like an analog style gauge. Some features that really come in handy are the camera views you can also use in here as well, which give you the ability to actually look in the back of the vehicle. It has what's called a family cam, which is this top-down view of the back seats, which give you the ability to toggle through each seat individually. So if you have children in the back, especially the third row, which is traditionally a fairly hard row to see, you can actually click on each individual seat. Again, I love the screens, I love the size of all of it, but you know, having huge screens that are predominantly touchscreen can kind of be distracting in a way, because you have to look at the screen in order to make your selections. There's not really going to be any muscle memory behind it to where you just know where a button is to get somewhere. You have to actually physically see what screen you're on so you can toggle through menus and make different choices like that. From a ride perspective, the ride is very, very smooth. I mean, it is absolutely a pleasure. And, you know, when this thing's running, it's got a pretty aggressive exhaust note, which is really nice, but that doesn't resonate into the cab. So you really don't feel it unless you get on it. And if you hit the throttle, you can definitely tell you have a big V8 under the hood of this thing. But during normal cruising speeds, it's very quiet. And again, you really just can't hear a lot of that noise coming into the cabin. You know, a lot of folks said that this is essentially the SUV version of the Ram Limited truck that I reviewed, and I would say that that's kind of accurate, but kind of not. From a ride perspective, it's certainly very, very smooth, and it definitely emulates that truck, which is kind of interesting because typically the goal was to get a truck to ride like an SUV. And in this case, you know, that truck rode so smooth that, you know, to have an SUV ride like that truck is actually pretty impressive. The other side of it is the interior, the dash, the gauges. Everything is a lot different than the Ram. So this is certainly not, you know, a Ram truck in an SUV package, calling it the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. The interior is completely different than what you would see in a Ram. It's just doesn't even share, I think, a single panel or a single button or knob. It's just entirely different. This certainly feels far more on the luxury line, whereas the Ram feels a little bit more on the luxury truck line, if that makes sense. This is certainly the type of interior you could see in any high-end luxury vehicle, whereas again, the truck is really nice for a truck, but it's not necessarily an interior that you would see on like a sports car or a luxury sedan. This interior looks like you could, you know, pull it out of a Bentley because it's that nice. The one thing that I know my wife would like about the Ram over this is the center console storage area, where you can actually slide it back and she could put her purse inside of it and have that storage. where on this it doesn't have that type of center storage. Actually, the center console armrest underneath it is a cooler, so you could put drinks and things like that inside of them to keep it cool, but it's not necessarily a big cavernous storage spot for you to be able to put a purse and other stuff like that. And then the front area, it's got a pocket, but it's just big enough to carry your essentials. It's not necessarily something, again, that you could put large objects into. Overall, though, they've done a fantastic job on the interior of this. This is one of those vehicles that you hop into and you're instantly impressed. And I don't think there's anybody who could really hop out of any other vehicle directly into this and not feel impressed. I've yet to find a vehicle that I've reviewed that has an interior that's as impressive as this. And my wife's owned the Infiniti QX80, Lincoln Navigator, her Expedition Now. We've driven the new Denali. None of those have an interior that can rival this. This, to me, is in a class of its own. It really is. It's just super impressive what they've been able to do and the feel they've been able to give you when you get into one of these new Jeeps. And I believe this interior is very similar to what you would get in a brand new, or the new body style Jeep Grand Cherokee, as well as the standard Wagoneer. So the Grand Wagoneer, of course, is the full-size version of the Jeep. So this is very, very cool, and I think that the folks over at General Motors and Ford certainly have some competition on their hands now in terms of a full-size SUV segment. But another feature, there's a button right above the shifter that has an arrow pointing to that screen with the power button. But is it on? But I just can't see it. Oh, the screen is on. Okay, so from the driver's perspective, it blocks your view so you can't actually see what's on the screen. But my wife is indicating that the screen is actually on. So that's really cool. So that screen is actually a multimedia screen for the passenger. You can adjust your audio, video, and even HDMI connections. So you can connect your phone through the HDMI port in the center stack, and you can actually watch movies and play media through that screen. That is really, really cool. And again, from the driver's perspective, I can't even tell it's on. It has that privacy type of filter wherever, if you're looking at it from an angle, it blacks it out. So I'm over here trying to figure out how to turn the screen on. My wife's indicating to me that the screen's been on the entire time. So the screen is also a touch screen, so it's not just an LED or an LCD display. It's actually a touch screen where you can go through the different menus and make changes. Very cool. I could absolutely see this being a family hauler for long, long trips, because it gives you so much cool information. And there's also a touch screen in the back in the center armrest area that gives the rear passengers the capability of also adjusting controls for themselves. Very cool. Now, this stretch of road that we're on right now is asphalt, and it's kind of that loud asphalt. And you typically can tell when you transition from like a quiet, smooth asphalt to a louder asphalt. And for the life of me, I really don't know construction-wise what's different about it, other than maybe some of the materials in the asphalt are starting to be exposed over time. But you can certainly hear the volume difference when we transition from that smoother, quieter asphalt to this louder asphalt. And it's noticeable. The interior of the vehicle certainly isn't muting it out as much as you would think, or as much as you might think based on what we were just driving on before. But this is a challenge with any vehicle. When you move to this type of road surface, how do you mute that out completely from getting into the cab of the vehicle? And as luxurious as this vehicle is, as well appointed as it is, and really how well they've dampened it, you're still going to have road conditions that are going to resonate into the cab, such as, this road that we're driving on right now. One of the things that's always interested me is the concept, or at least the idea, of putting your power seat controls on the door versus on the side of the seat. Brands like Mercedes, BMW, those brands have been doing it for a while, where they put all your seat controls on the door, but typically your North American brands have not. They've usually put it on the side of the seat. And it's not that it's difficult to use, it's actually more intuitive to look at it on the door because you can see what you're adjusting. It's just different because I'm used to reaching down to the side of the seat to make my seat adjustments. But one thing that I know my wife would like about this vehicle versus the Denali that she drove, or the Yukon Denali, is the fact that the driver's seat can go much higher in this vehicle than the Denali could. So she'll be able to see a much better perspective over the hood, and the dash itself actually sits lower, so it doesn't have any major hump that sticks up. It does rise up slightly above your instrument cluster, but not much. And you do have heads-up display on this vehicle as well, but this is a very similar view to what she has in her Expedition. I think in this vehicle she would absolutely have no problem driving and seeing over the hood in this one, because again, the seat does rise up higher and the dash sits lower, and the hood also slopes down a little bit more as well. From a power and performance perspective, this thing's a rocket. There's been a few times where I've hit the throttle a little bit harder than I intended, and it merged into traffic and was able to accelerate up to the speed of interstate and expressway traffic very, very quickly. And that's always something people are looking for. If you're going to pay, you know, upwards of $100,000 for a vehicle, you certainly want it to have the power and the performance and not just the luxury. And this kind of combines everything all together into one. Yeah, it certainly has no problem accelerating. This thing is, it's kind of a beast. With that 8-speed automatic transmission and like 470 horsepower, this thing is absolutely insanely fast. I mean, the power that you're getting in these modern vehicles rivals what you were able to add to vehicles just 10 years ago. I mean, you'd have to put superchargers and turbos and all sorts of crazy things to get this type of power. All the safety features kind of kick in when you hit the road as well. Your lane keeping features, your radar cruise control, your blind spot mitigation, all this stuff kicks in. And this vehicle can come to a full stop if the vehicle in front of us hits its brakes or slams its brakes on, which is really nice. It just has a lot of safety features that, you know, just 5 or 10 years ago were all optional, and a lot of manufacturers are just now including them because they make the vehicle a lot safer. They protect you and your family and even other people on the road. Now, something that's interesting, because it's about 35 degrees outside, is, you know, we're adjusting the air conditioning controls on it right now and the fan speeds. And it doesn't seem like there's much of a difference between level 1 fan speed and level 3 or 4 fan speeds. I'm trying to adjust them down slightly to reduce the volume or the sound coming out of the vents. But it's on its lowest right now, and if I turn it one more lower, it turns the system off. If I raise it up to 2 or 3, it sounds the same. It's a gradual increase. And it almost feels as if it's kind of like speed matching the vehicle, kind of like a volume control, even though it's not. Very interesting. But it's very smooth, very compliant on the road. And I have my wife next to me, and she's kind of commenting on things, but she lost her voice, so that's the reason why she's not chiming in. But she actually does not believe it's quite as smooth as the Ram Limited that we drove. She thinks that truck rides a little bit smoother, which it could, because technically it's a lighter weight vehicle, because it doesn't have, you know, anything in the bed when you're not typically riding it, and it has air suspension and other things like that. Whereas this also has air suspension, and it's smooth, don't get me wrong, but to her it doesn't feel quite as smooth as the Ram that we had for a while felt. But in my opinion, I think it's pretty on par personally. I think it's very, very close. But yeah, having the ability to adjust your ride height, all of that is really cool. This road that we're on right now, actually when it rains, it floods in some areas, and I've been through this in a car when it floods, and it's kind of scary at times because you feel the water just underneath the floorboards, and it's a really interesting feel when you're going through high waters, which of course you should never drive through high waters. But with a vehicle like this, to dynamically be able to raise the suspension up several inches to be able to traverse that type of condition is pretty nice. And we all know Jeeps are well known for their off-road prowess and their capabilities of going in different types of conditions and environments. So this is no different. You know, it's interesting, and I was having a conversation with another YouTuber a while back, and you know, people go out and they buy Corvettes, they go out and they buy, you know, really high-end sports cars, and a lot of those sports cars are in the $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 price point. Well, the reality is now, you know, SUVs and pickup trucks are also in those $100,000, $110,000 price points. So if you are going to go out and spend that kind of money, in my opinion, I think it's better pointed towards something like an SUV, which gives you a lot of utility, something like a truck, which gives you a lot of utility, as well as all the luxury features of these super high-end sports cars and these super high-end luxury vehicles for about the same price. So you're paying for more capability, but you're typically paying the same amount as a vehicle that just essentially has a luxury brand name attached to it. So I got my daughter in the back, and she's just exploring everything back there, and she says there's cooling seats and heated seats, so you have both in the back, and that's a very, very different thing. You typically don't see cooling seats in any row other than the front 2 seats on most luxury vehicles. So the fact that the back has both heated and cooled seats is pretty amazing, to be honest, because again, you typically just don't see those on any vehicles. I'm sure some super luxury, you know, Mercedes, BMWs, you know, vehicles like that may offer them, but typically all you see is heated seats in the back, and yeah, that's really cool. Also, The climate control and all of that, she's saying that comes from the center console as well as the sides, I believe. And then there are what appear to be speakers, again, above us. And there's all sorts of speakers. I'm sure a lot of them are for the sound isolation, sound dampening system. But there are these larger trimmed off what appear to be speakers, but there's no sound that comes out of them. So my gut tells me that's probably for your Bluetooth whenever you're connected, so anybody in the vehicle can partake in the conversation. It's my theory, at least. From a comfort perspective, how do you feel back there?
It's very roomy.
It is.
That's what I liked most about it when we got in. It's really roomy. It's aesthetically pleasing, and the warming seats are great.
Oh yeah. What about the comfort itself? Does it feel like you've been in you've been in your mom's Expedition, you've been in my truck, you've been in your Lexus? How does this feel from a comfort perspective?
I like it. It's not making me feel like I'm slouching over like normally these vehicles are like that for some reason. And then there's an armrest here, which is leather and plush.
Yeah, it's really nice. And you really need to listen to her opinion because she stands on her feet like 12 to 14 hours a day. She's a NICU nurse. So she actually treats little babies, and she's about to be a nurse practitioner. So very proud of my daughter.
Thank you.
So the minute I stopped recording, my daughter chimed in with some more feedback on the second row. And what did you say about it? You said you really like the seating position because typically when you're in the back seat, you feel like it's pushing you forward or kind of making you slouch forward, right?
Yeah, I was just adding to the ergonomics of sitting in the back seat. So usually you feel like you're hunching over, the seat is pushing your face forward and your back backwards, and it can get really uncomfortable, especially like you were mentioning earlier. Being on a long drive, I would definitely rather sit in here than I would in other vehicles that we've been in, just because it feels more like a chair at home versus a typical car where you're slouching. But the other thing I was going to add is that the third row seems, if this was a family car, the third row seems like whatever family you put back there is going to be really involved in the conversation. It doesn't feel like you sit in the third row, you feel secluded and you can't hear anybody. But because there's no middle seat here, or it's pushed down for the armrest, I feel like if your cousin or whoever is sitting in the back, you can talk to them just fine, or you can see your little toddler baby, and so that's really nice.
What's really cool, and what I was thinking about while you were saying that, they've done a really good job of making the second and third row almost feel like the first and second row in your typical vehicle, to where the chairs are as comfortable as you might expect up front,
right.
And very executive, right? This is the type of vehicle you might pick up somebody important with, like me. I have my family in here. You guys are super important to me. But, you get inside the vehicle and you feel like the second row is actually taking care of you. Like they meant to seat people that typically, would sit in the front seat, but now you can sit in the second row.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as soon as I got in, I was impressed.
Could you see yourself owning one of these, considering you drive a Lexus? Now, she has the small Lexus SUV, but she likes smaller vehicles typically for maneuverability. And, her next vehicle, she wants it to be a little bit larger in case we hopefully have a growing family. And, from the perspective of the size of this vehicle, how do you feel about it?
I was shocked to know that it's the size of Mom's current car, or near that size, because it doesn't feel massive, which in my opinion, I don't like. When I get in the car, I don't like to jump in and feel like I'm driving a bus, but that's me. Other people love it. But I actually like it.
It's really cool. I need to get her on the channel so much more. She just, great presenter, and
lots of giggles.
Lots of good information. I mean, really, and she drives a lot. So she at one point was commuting back and forth between where we live here in San Antonio, all sorts of places. She drives all the time, and typically she's a road warrior. So this is really good feedback because she spends a lot of time in vehicles. And I know a lot of you folks, whenever you look at reviews on what's going to be comfortable for you and your family, you want to know what it's going to be like in a real life situation on longer trips. All right, guys. Well, I sure hope you've enjoyed this little overview of this Jeep Grand Wagoneer. Again, we're going to have it for a bit longer. So, guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.